well, you're saying something, but I think what you really mean is this category. So you think you're telling me this, but I'm the expert, and I know that you're really telling me about class, or you're really telling me about power or something. And the whole setup, they said, is rigged, and it's a power dynamic between the researcher and the people studied. And so their idea was that, instead of this kind of starting with categories, you have to start from the interlocutors that you speak to, and they have to give you the materials for understanding, and you have to treat them respectfully. And so I think this movement, sometimes called ethnomethods, is very influential in people who are studying the internet with infrastructure studies. I don't think of Paul Edwards as being this approach, though. So I think that's a contrast between Paul Edwards and the way that I study infrastructure. So, for example, Bruno Latour is known for this actor network theory, where he says that all of life is like capillaries, and your job is to follow the threads and delimit the associations. And this is very similar to ethnomethodology, so I think it's very consistent. In fact, in his book, Reassembling the Social, I believe he said that it was very similar to ethnomethodology. So I think this is the approach that I take, is rather than starting with categories or levels or something like this, it's more of an attempt to trace pathways or follow associations or something like this. Again, it's hard to describe as a list of procedures. I think it's more like an intuition, where you're struck by something and it leads you to something else. I mean, the big challenge with all of these methods is really that the ethnomethodologists and Latour, they may say that they want everything to be a network of associations or come from below, but at some point they have to write the research, and it's a big conflict between the method of everything being the same and equal and starting from below and having a story. And so I think that's what I see as a challenge, is that I do then have to decide what story to tell. And it's difficult because you want to acknowledge that the story you tell isn't the only story, because that's an important lesson of social science from the last decades. However, I don't think that makes a very good paper if all you say is there are many associations, there are many things that are connected. And so I think that really is more of a matter of writing style. So you need to understand that to be read, you must have an argument. And that means you need to choose something that's important and emphasize it, and de-emphasize something else. Are you still there?
No.
Christian, sorry, somewhere after you said about that you need to read a paper and to show that your case is cases, the sound got worse again. Can you repeat a bit?
I can't hear you very well, so your sound is cutting in and out. If you'd like, I can try disconnecting and reconnecting. Sometimes that helps.
No, I think on your side everything is okay. It's something on Polina's side.
Okay, then all right. Because if it is recorded on Leona's side, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's okay. So, by the way, in Russia we have very, very bright-minded ethnomethodologists, and they will be at the conference, I hope. And if you want, it would be nice probably to meet them, because we have, I suppose, rather interesting range of researchers, and some of them are studying technology, not only internet, but they study barriers of technologies. Of technology development in different cases, and I hope they will tell about their research first at this conference in May. But getting back to the internet as a complex system, as a large technology system, what do you think about probably not the scales of theory, but on the levels of how you deal with your subject? I mean, this refers to our research of city infrastructure, of urban internets, or we're still looking for the proper term. But first we name it levels of locality. I mean that internet develops on different levels, which are global, national, language, and also we have that infrastructure often develops in some differently, let's say, on the city level. And here I wonder, what can we, how can we look at it? I mean, whether do you consider this level interesting, and the same this division fruitful for the research, and whether it makes sense from your point of view?
I mean, years ago, I don't know when, it was really quite a while ago, I published a paper arguing that the internet is always local. And the reason I published that is at the time the internet was so new that people thought that it was a monolith, and they thought, oh well, the internet, if we get the internet, we'll have the internet, and the internet is one thing everywhere. And so drawing from some researchers in different countries and their experience of the internet, I just argued that the internet is this very local thing. So in fact, one of the researchers was writing about Russia at the time, but this was some years ago. I think it was maybe, I don't know, 2002 or 3 or something, so quite a while ago. So anyway, I agree completely, but it's not a big surprise to say the internet is local if your orientation is to say everything is influenced by context and you should start from the bottom. So one example of this kind of thinking that you might be interested in if you haven't seen it is Alison Powell's work on data walks. So I don't know if you've seen this work, but are you still there? Oh.
Yeah, I just turned on the video to probably it will improve the connection from my side. So it is Alison
Powell. I can send it to you.
Thank you.
The idea of data walking is a combination of ethnomethodology and internet studies. And it's to say that to notice things about the way that the internet works in cities, you plan these walks where you walk around and look for the material infrastructure, and then you think about the other kinds of ways that society is related to what you see. So it's very much in line with the kinds of topics we've been talking about so far.
Mm-hmm. And should we from your point of view, or I mean not we particularly, but is it all right, I will say another words, whether there are some blind spaces, some things we don't understand about this infrastructure on some local level or something. I mean, not about we want to describe everything, right? But the things we really need to understand, something on the edge, whether there are some things in internet and infrastructure studies like this now.
I mean, I personally think the most exciting area is automation. I don't know if this relates to the Russian context. You should tell me. But I mean, here there's such an enthusiasm for automation. In usually this is described as algorithm studies, or the sort of the way that software eats the world is one phrase from I believe it was. I think it was the head of Yahoo said that software is eating the world. So I think this is a very exciting area. So the reason it's exciting for me is that it seems that there are really significant consequences for people in the automation of tasks that didn't involve the internet before. So in my own recent work, I've been trying to focus on systems where we have an internet platform that takes over the role of some non-internet thing, particularly in the area of housing or employment or news and information. And the way that transforming the system into a computerized system that includes a automated decision making that decides what or who is important can add new and kind of scary consequences. So a classic example is that we know in the United States we have a huge problem of racial discrimination in housing, and it's a national priority to address this problem, and there are laws against racial discrimination in housing. And yet, one of the things that's happened is when we move the systems for finding housing, including temporary lodging like hotels. So if we create something like Airbnb, or we use something like homes.com or Zillow or these platforms to do housing, the entire system becomes opaque, and it often does so with negative consequences for the people that that can be harmed. So a fantastic study recently by Benjamin Edelman found that because the new way we get housing is via Airbnb, where you look at a picture of someone who might be your host, that it's drastically increased racial discrimination, because you look at the picture of your host and this gives you the opportunity to discriminate by race. And so he calculated the penalty that you pay if you're a host and you're Black, for example. And this is something that wouldn't be a problem before, because we would know that you shouldn't attach a photograph to an application for housing in the physical world, because there are these laws about discrimination in housing. You wouldn't think to do that. But we built the online systems, and it builds in photographs as an assumption that every platform should have a profile. And the norm is that everyone sees a picture of something. So